Hello, good evening. This is the last session, and in so many ways, the most important session of this Georgia conference, because it really gets to the idea of what we do in WGSS, in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. Again, my name is Dr. Stephanie Evans. I am the Institute Director for WGSS at Georgia State University and the convener of this conference. I would like to say thank you so much to our co-sponsors, CSTAD, the Center for the Study of Africa and its Diaspora, and the Department of History, and the support of the dean and the provost, and definitely the team, the undergraduate, graduate students, definitely staff, Andy Reisinger, and all of the, all who spent time and energy to make sure that this conference happened, especially SUSA, the Southeast Women's Studies Association, and Stacy Keltner in particular, but also the SUSA team. There were several people from SUSA who helped facilitated and moderated panels. So this is the final session for Gender Studies in Georgia Virtual Conference after 2 full days. And hello, Stacy, we see you're here. And this was so important to me because in WGSS, we have this term praxis, right? Theory and practice. What does this look like in action? What do the ideas that we have, personalist, political, intersectionality, and those types of ideas that we have in feminist theory? What does gender look like? What is experience? I'm teaching feminist theories this semester, and what do identity in politics, or as is articulated by Barbara Smith in the Combahee River Collective. What does all that mean? Like, what are we sitting here, we're reading these fancy books, and, we're studying, we're smart, we're writing papers, we're using big words, very important. But the foundation of women's studies, like the foundation of African American studies, is based in community action, right? Problem solving, research, teaching, and community building. And so this session is the application of the ideas that we've been discussing. The state plenary was persistence is resistance. So the idea that WGSS has been around for 50 years and to persist, and yet she persists, right? This idea that to persist, to insist, to stay here, to push the boundaries further, to demand our voices be heard, that is persistence, right? That is resistance. Today's plenary, Race, Gender, and the Vote, which was amazing, talked about what does it mean to commemorate the 100th of the 19th Amendment of women's right to vote, understanding that not all women earn the right to vote or access to the ballot. And then, of course, the keynote address last night with Stacey Abrams and her Our Time Is Now, and Lead from the Outside, the books that she's written and the work that she's done. And really, I really want to impress how important it is to avail yourselves to the information, like the Suppress, the film that we just watched. But if you read Our Time Is Now, it's like a primer because it tells you about the history and the application of laws. Yes, we have the 19th Amendment, but she connects it to the 15th Amendment and the African American men's right to vote, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, but also ties in the Vietnam era student movement and the 26th Amendment, when the voting age went from 21 to 18, and all of the social activism that was involved in that. The origin of gerrymandering, the concept of drawing districts where the politicians choose the voters and not the other way around, which is very much part of the suppression. All of that is in very, very accessible, forward language that, very much like the film Suppressed, which also featured Carol Anderson from Emory University, really brings all of this message together about how we got here, why everyone is so energized, why this particular vote in this particular state and this particular historical moment is so important. And definitely, as we're a state school, I absolutely understand and embrace that this is a nonpartisan issue, that voting and voting rights access is not about Democrat or Republican. We all have our leanings and we all have our values, but part of the value is if we say we're American and we believe in American values, then justice has got to be one of those values, particularly if the rhetoric is saying liberty and justice for all, right? We have to make sure that that's what that means. And so that is why we're here today, to ensure that we are giving, if we're gender studies in Georgia, that we're giving a Georgia voter information workshop. And the emphasis here is on work. We have work to do, and making sure that we have as much information, not just leading up to the election in a few weeks, but what does it mean to be involved and active as a citizen, as someone who is pushing the boundaries for not only civil rights, but as Carol Anderson writes, human rights. So whether or not you're designated a citizen in this country should not matter. That, you know, we should make sure that all human rights, not just the civil rights, but all human rights are also part of the discussion. But I digress. And so today we are joined by three very, very engaged folks who are working with state organizations, national organization, and right here at Georgia State University. I was very, very adamant that students are involved in this conference, not just as bystanders and attendees, but as presenters. And I'm so, so grateful that we have representation at all levels. So I will turn the mic over to our three guests. I'll just introduce them so you know who they are. They'll give a lengthy introduction. And I've asked them to talk a little bit about who they are, where they're from, the work that they do, and you know, a little bit about their organizations and what they're doing, what's going on right now at this historical moment. And then I will facilitate questions. When you go to ask your questions, excuse me, you can ask your questions by dropping them in the chat. And you don't have to wait till the end of the session. Go ahead and as the questions come up, as the speakers are speaking, you can go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. Just make sure that you click chat, and you're looking at the session chat, not the event chat, because if you do event chat, it goes everywhere. But you're here for this particular session. Okay, so we have Wanda Mosley from Black Voters Matter, who is the Georgia coordinator. And shout out to Latosha and Cliff, who have the blackest bus in America, who is traversing everywhere, and I really appreciate Latosha Brown because she is in the spirit. I started this conference off with Bernice Johnson Reagan and Sweet Honey in the Rock. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes, and just singing. And Latosha is just like, she is keeping the spirit of Sweet Honey in the Rock alive. And it's not that only we're going to be active, but we are going to be active with joy, and we're going to sing, we'll be loud, and you know, take this bus across the country. And I really, really appreciate her and Cliff for that work. Julia Geske from Georgia PIRG actually reached out to me, and this is why, you know, you never know what your work will mean. This is someone who, as you know, who reached out to professors to say, hey, we're really invested in making sure that our organization is part of activating public interest, right? Public interest group, which is to say it's not just about the vote on this particular, you know, the up and down, like the offices. It's about the issues. It's about the environment. It's about recycling. It is about all of the larger things. And so Georgia, so Julia is just, you know, one of those random like workers. She's just working, and she emailed and I was like, by the way, we're having a Georgia workshop. Don't you want to come and tell us about what you're doing? So Georgia PIRG is here as well. And then Sequoia Gonzalez, who is a member of GSU College of Arts and Sciences Undergraduate Student Advisory Board. And I have to give a shout out to Trevor Melton, who is in my feminist theories class. And Trevor and I were talking about quite a few things around his interest and some of the his community and who he's working with and the student activists that he's working with. And I said, do you know anyone who's, doing voting? He's like, oh, yes, my girl Sequoia, she's on it. She's doing this stuff. And so shout out Trevor Melton for making this connection. And thank you so much, Sequoia, for making yourself available. So if you're stay on mute, if you're not speaking, speak for about, I think I said 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 5 to something. So we'll start with Wanda, then we'll go to Julia, and then we'll go to Sequoia. And then I'll come back and facilitate the Q&A. And thank you all so much for being here.
All righty. Uh-oh. Can y'all hear me? Okay, I can't hear myself, but if y'all can hear me, then I'll just go for it. My name is Wanda Mosley. I'm the Senior State Coordinator at Black Voters Matter here in the great state of Georgia. So happy to be with you all this evening. Here we are in the midst of early voting. Tomorrow is our mandatory statewide Saturday voting. So we will see, as we have seen just about every day since early voting began on the 12th, record turnout. That is the headline that is going to continue across the nation, but especially here in Georgia, record turnout. So thank you, Dr. Evans, for inviting me. Glad to be here. Glad to talk to you all a little bit about the work that we do over here at Black Voters Matter. We are a nonpartisan organization. We have a 501c3 and a 501c4. I will stay in the 501c3 lane for the purposes of this discussion today. Our organization at its core is a power building organization. We work with Black led organizations, Black community leaders, primarily in rural areas and in some of the cities outside of the metropolitan area. We work with these organizations to build infrastructure to forward a cause that is important to them and their community. And so in our efforts to build power, we have chosen to do so through electoral spaces during elections, because we see elections as an opportunity for folks to build power. And elections are also a form of, when we start building this power, it's a form of harm reduction, right? So we encourage our folks to be a part of the process. We believe in participatory governance. We believe that the people in the communities that elected officials serve should have a say in what is going on with these laws and bills and ordinances that govern their everyday lives. We focus most of our efforts on local elections, believe it or not, but we recognize that, this year is a big election because it is presidential and it's, Senate and Congress, and then in 2 years we'll come back and it'll be a governor's race here in Georgia, so we respect that as well. But in the odd years that are sometimes referred to as off years, those elections are just as important to us. City council, mayor, county commissioner, those are the folks who affect our lives every single day with every stroke of the pen. So we know that that is really our opportunity to build power. Last year in Georgia, we saw a number of cities have an opportunity to elect their first Black mayor. Cities that have been predominantly Black for quite some time, but never had Black mayors, especially in South and Southwest Georgia. And in those instances, those races were decided by less than 100 votes. So I'll talk specifically about the folks down in Valdosta, Georgia, where Valdosta State University has an actual polling precinct on campus, where there are approximately 420 something or so persons who are registered to vote at that precinct on their campus. Their mayoral runoff was decided by less than 100 votes. I can tell you that there were maybe 15, 20 votes cast at that polling precinct. And so my message to those students when I visited them at the beginning of the year was, you all had the power to decide who would be the next mayor in the city of Valdosta. And I told them, think about that for a minute. You're college students, right? You're on the brink, the beginning of adulthood. You all had collectively the power to decide who would be the mayor in the city where you attend school. But when we don't vote, we give away that power. We abdicate that power. We give away that responsibility. And then when things go bad, things go wrong, we don't see the types of issues addressed the way we want them, then we must think back to the opportunity that we let slip away. And then moving forward, be smart enough, strategic enough to make sure we don't make that same mistake. And so when we travel around the country and in the state in the Blackest Bus of America, and if you've not seen us on social media, do yourself a favor, go check out the bus. It's pretty amazing, if I do say so myself. We use this bus as a vehicle to bring Black love and Black joy to these communities where we want to build Black power. As you can imagine, we are unapologetically Black in our work. We don't make any apologies for that. We know that for the most part, Black voters are often the central target of voter suppression efforts. So those who just witnessed the documentary, which is amazing, I've seen it a few times, but I think I'm about at the limit with the documentary because it's triggering, because I lived through that. I was in Randolph County. I know Mr. Jenkins. I talked to him on the phone last week. So all of those things that you all saw, I experienced on the ground firsthand in 2018. And it was awful. It was not fun. It was terrible. It was an embarrassment, to be honest with you. We've seen voter suppression come at us in many different forms. It looks like closing precincts, like in Randolph County, attempting to close 7 of 9 precincts from a primary to a general election under the guise of they're not ADA compliant. But as the folks in the community mentioned, it was ADA compliant in April when people voted there. But when we get to November, all of a sudden it's not good enough. That's a problem. So closing over 200 precincts in our state since that landmark decision, Shelby v. Holder, which basically gutted the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. It basically took out Section 5, which were pre-clearances that required certain states or counties or jurisdictions who had a long history of suppressing votes for Black and brown folks in this country. So removing the pre-clearance meant that those areas no longer had to get permission from the Department of Justice before they made changes to an upcoming election. It was the wild, wild west. We saw the state of Texas reconvene the state legislature within hours of passing that decision from the Supreme Court to basically enact a long list of voter suppression tactics. Again, here in Georgia, it looked like closing over 200 precincts. It looked like having inadequate equipment at polling stations, no power cords, paper, etc. It looked like not having poll workers who were trained and available to execute the election, which again had, say it with me, record turnout. Right? So we knew this was coming. And when leaders abdicate responsibility and just basically let the chips fall where they may, well, the chips in our neighborhoods fall in a bad way and things don't ever go well for us. So now what we're seeing, fast forward to 2020, we are again seeing the resilience and the determination of voters all across this state. We are seeing people willing to stand in line 6, 7, 8 hours. We are seeing people come in comfortable clothes with a snack, with a camp chair, willing to wait it out. We are seeing people who are not going to have their vote suppressed this time around. We are seeing people go online and check to make sure that they're registered, check to make sure that everything is up to date and that they are at the right place. We are seeing people opt to vote by mail because of a pandemic, because again, they're not going to let anything stop them from getting to that polling precinct this year in 2020 like it happened in 2018. So I do this work in the spirit of Black love and Black power. And I do this because I see so many people who are determined and they energize me and they make me excited to do this work. So I am happy to be here with you all. I'm happy to hear what the ladies are about to discuss. And thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, that was awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you again, first of all, so much for having me. Definitely the best outcome of one of my emails. Yeah, I'm really excited to share a little bit about the work my team and I have been doing this semester. So first, to briefly introduce myself, my name is Julia. I'm the organizer here in Atlanta for Georgia PIRG's New Voters Project. So I myself am a recent college graduate, having just finished up my college career this past spring. As everyone here knows, this year's been pretty crazy, and this was definitely not the world that I was expecting to enter upon my graduation. But in spite of all the craziness and all the uncertainty surrounding us right now, I did know for sure that the one thing that I wanted to do was just play my part in making a positive difference in the midst of just everything going on. And then, at least for me, nothing felt more important than getting involved and helping on this election. So that's essentially how I became involved with Georgia PIRG this year. But to give you a little bit of context about the organization itself, Georgia PIRG is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, student-led organization that strives to equip young people with the tools and the resources that they need to become effective activists and powerful leaders. So we've seen young people throughout history leading movements for major social change time and time again. So we believe that young people really do have the power to shape the future that they are going to inherit. So this is our first year officially organizing in Georgia, but we have worked for over 40 years to help students across the country get organized, mobilized, and energized so that they can continue to be on this cutting edge of change. So we do work on a variety of issues. So we work on renewable energy campaigns, college affordability, hunger and homelessness, and more. So just in the public interest, that's our area of work. But this year, due to the proximity and just the importance of this election, our priority campaign has been the New Voters Project this fall, which is where I've been working for the past several months. So this is a peer-to-peer youth voter registration and mobilization effort that has the goal of turning out the youth vote on college campuses across the country. So we really recognize and celebrate the fact that young people make up the largest and the most diverse group of people in America today. And we're really determined to utilize all of our potential power. But we also recognize, unfortunately, the fact that our age group has been historically underrepresented when it comes to elections. I don't want to weigh you down with all the stats on this topic that I could throw at you right now, but one shocking one that I will mention is that in 2016, only 38% of all eligible young people voted. So if we were in a room right now, I could say, look to the person to your right and the person to your left, and only one of you will have voted. And just that low participation in this essential aspect of our political process is just surprises me every time. And it's definitely something that we need to work to change. So that's why this year we have this unique opportunity to raise up our voices and to make that real change. But that only happens if we work to make sure that every single person votes. So that's why we've dedicated the semester to making sure all of our peers are educated and registered and mobilized, and most importantly, motivated to make that difference. So that's really who we are and what our mission is. The next thing I want to do is just share a little bit of information about the awesome work we have done in Georgia so far this year. So as I mentioned, this is our first year officially working in Georgia. We were drawn to working here due to the fact that there are over 1.6 million eligible young voters in the state, which is crazy. And they make up one of the most economically and racially diverse cohorts in the entire country. And from the beginning, we've just been blown away by the commitment and the excitement of Georgia students, despite all the ongoing challenges of being in the middle of a global pandemic. We recruited a team of 25 interns who've been the heart of the campaign throughout the whole semester. They've really stepped up as leaders and young activists and have accomplished amazing things in just such a short amount of time. Just to name a couple of our team's accomplishments, which I could just go on and on about, we've spent over 100 hours phone banking, speaking to almost 600 students. We've sent over 2,000 text messages, 4,000 emails, and hundreds of messages to students' group me's and social media circles. We've done presentations in various professors' classes, and we've activated almost 100 listservs, which have reached over 6,000 students. So all those numbers really culminated in getting over 400 students registered to vote this year and getting 200 more to sign pledges to vote safely. These are numbers, but they're really amazing accomplishments, which were led by more amazing students. It's just really exciting to see young people leading efforts like these, getting to hear their excitement and seeing it play out in their actions is something that's really special. And it just shows that anyone can get involved and do this, and we can really accomplish great things if we all do this work together. So that's what we've done so far. Despite all of this, we're not done yet. So we're turning our attention now to getting out the vote. So registration is really important, but it's only the first step in this big process. So if we really want to ensure that our demographic is heard, we are going to make sure that people actually follow through and cast their ballots. So over the next 12 days, we're focusing on trying to talk with as many people as possible and help them all make plans to vote. These contacts are super important, and they've been proven time and time again through various election cycles to really increase the likelihood that people turn out to vote, especially young people. So during this election cycle particularly, making these vote plans is more important than ever. We're living in unprecedented times with new rules and regulations popping up every single day, it seems like. So due to all this uncertainty, both new and returning voters are going to need guidance and assistance navigating through all the confusing new things that are being put in place. So making these contacts, developing these plans is something everyone can do, and it really could be the difference between someone choosing to vote or choosing not to, which is what we want to make sure everyone is doing. So that is really who we are and what we've done. I'll stop there and hand it over to the next speaker, but thank you again. I'm excited to keep talking with you all.
Wow, thank you, Julia. I admire your work, and Miss Wanda, I admire your work too. First off, I just want to shout out Trevor Melton one more time. They've been so encouraging. I really appreciate their work, and they've really pushed me to speak out more and be more courageous to help represent my community, which is the Latinx community and the first generation community here at Georgia State University. I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us in today's voter information workshop. My name is Sequoia, and I am currently a senior studying journalism as a first generation college student, and serve my fellow peers as a member of the Undergraduate Council and the Undergraduate Student Advisory Board of the College of Arts and Sciences here at Georgia State. I've experienced many struggles and understand perspectives of others and do my best to learn more about them. As a daughter of a homeless woman who rose from the ashes, I know how difficult it is to form a flower path for others to follow behind. I know how difficult that really can be. And being part of the Undergraduate Council and the USAB, I get the chance to represent the Latinx and the first generation communities. In a time when the pandemic has economy and a change in our schooling systems, I want to let my peers know that they can trust me, use my voice. It is you all who get to help make a change in the system. And I've heard you, and we are already making changes. In the next semester, we are changing how courses are made. We are ensuring the safety of our students, and we are pushing for a more inclusive community that includes the LGBTQ plus community, the Latinx community, the Asian community, and the Native American community, and so much more. And I've actually partnered with Trevor Melton, and we are working together to ensure that students are educated not only on their rights for this election, but educated on how important it is to include every minority, because this is a battle for everybody. More than ever, there is another system that still needs changing, and that is here locally. For those of you who attended yesterday's conference, you were able to hear Miss Stacey Abrams' encouraging words, and you can recall that she said we needed to start to work on changing the oppressive systems here locally. This means we need to focus on our attention on who we vote in the office of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Electoral College is rigged against us. We saw that in the previous election 4 years ago, nearly 4 years ago. Pardon me. And then not only that, but we see locally poll watchers are growing more and more aggressive, and they're not being taken seriously. The lines are getting longer, and times are no longer allowed to be longer for the voters to come in to vote. There's no mandatory holiday for governmental workers to come in and vote. We see people in Texas whose votes are being suppressed because the drop-off boxes have been changed or have been completely erased. And so those drop boxes are placed in communities that are less diverse, causing those who are further away to drive all the way, nearly 2 hours, just to drop off their vote. Our voice is not being heard, and we need to make it heard. We need to pay close attention to the new bills being ratified. Now is the time that we truly educate ourselves on our rights. You have the right to vote. You have the right to have your voice heard, and no one can take that away from you. But if you stand silent and do nothing, it can be smited, and our brothers and sisters will continue to go unheard. So I ask those of you who are attending, please go out and vote. Bring 2 friends with you. Encourage others to vote. It is your civil duty to vote. Forget the partisans. Let me remind you that this is not about Democrat versus Republican. This is about the fight for our lives. By not voting, you show that you do not care about your rights, your family's rights, your friends' rights, or your significant other's rights. By staying silent, you get nowhere. By giving up, you give up on others. So shout out, shout to the rooftops about your frustrations so that everyone can hear. When we link hands together and shout in synchronous and harmonious tunes, those in power will be forced to listen to us, and they will have to take action. One small voice can grow to 1,000,000 and sound like one roar. So let's shout out and roar and vote, because nothing will keep us silent anymore.
Absolutely. So again, when I shouted them out, Trevor wasn't in the room, so thank you very much again for that connection. This is exactly what I had envisioned, and even more so, because what's happening here is that the people who are in the room, and please now, if you have not already, drop your questions in the chat. But now these organizations are connected. So Trevor, yesterday, they they emailed me several times. We want to get Stacey get this, and can you can connect this, and can we want just all excited and agitated, and I would have been irritated had I not been the same person like in undergrad, like, no, voter suppression was a thing, and now we have to get all these, we have to do it. And so it was absolutely wonderful, because now you're connected to Georgia PIRG. You're connected to the one office for Black Voters Matter. And so, it's as undergraduates, we want to lead everything. Like, we are going to lead the charge, when in fact, it's really about organizing and serving other people. And this is what Bernice Johnson Reagan was talking about, coalition politics. It's not always you setting the agenda and then you telling people to come. It's finding out what agendas are already on the table in action and what people are already doing in these circles that fulfill your agenda. So it's not like, I want the stage, I want what we're doing. It's finding out, okay, so now we've got 3 voter organizations who are connected to each other. You know each other, you have your emails, you've got, and to connect other people to say, okay, this is what we've got going on, this is what we can plan. That's how organizing happens. So this is very, very exciting. While we're waiting for the questions to show up in the chat, I have a question. Tell me about the first time you voted. And the reason why I asked this question is because I didn't vote. And so I'm just, what am I, 51 now? Okay, so I'm 51. I did not vote until I was 28 because it didn't matter to me. I grew up I'm an Air Force brat, so I moved from Germany to Illinois, Arizona. So part of my life was very privileged, but there was also a lot of problems, and so I moved out when I was 16. So I was working 2 jobs, finishing high school. By the time I could vote, I was just working. It was like, okay, well, pick one of any of these politicians. It doesn't matter to me because I'm still poor, I'm still broke, I'm still working. And so when I got into college at Cal State Long Beach and I started listening to my peers and taking these classes and the systems and the structures and, films like Suppressed, it was like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. It's not just me. I'm not just powerless. Power was taken away, right? Ms. Mosley was talking about power, and Black power is about resistance and emancipation. White power is about oppression. When you got a Black person saying Black power and a white person saying white power, they ain't saying the same thing. It's not the same. And so, white people, when you hear Black people say Black power, it's like, oh, well, if your power looks like my power, then your power looks like it's oppression. No. We're talking about like empowered empowering ourselves, having power over ourselves, right? And so for the first time when I was taking Black studies classes and taking women's studies classes, it became clear to me, I need to vote. But when I voted, and I told a story to Stacey Abrams and she laughed at me, I voted for Marsha Fineland, which I think was a great vote because it was a peace and freedom party. And but what I did not understand was that she was only on the ballot in California. There was no way that she could actually win in this critical election. And so there's all sorts of discussions how we get out of this prison of two parties that aren't working. We have to do that, but we have to do that. That's not right before an election. How about that? Right? We have to understand all of these dynamics. That's what peer education is about. So when I went to vote, my first vote was at 28. You all are making a difference in having, what Ms. Mosley just said. 15 people in Valdosta can change the whole city, which can change the whole state, which can change the whole nation. Tell me about the first time you voted, just very, very quickly, and then we'll see if there's questions in the chat.
Well, for me, it wasn't so much about the first time that I voted, because the first time I voted was actually kind of boring. It was absentee ballot when I was away at college. Well, actually, that's not true. I voted in the primary before I went away to college. But more interesting than that is how the voter registration process. Let's talk about that, because I grew up with my great-grandmother. And let me just tell you, not voting until 28 would not have been an option because I would have been homeless. Because if you lived in Granny's house, you were voting. And so on the morning of my 18th birthday, I awakened to a light breeze and the sound of paper ruffling. And it was Granny leaning over the bed, waving the voter registration application over my head, saying, "Wake up, you're 18, you're eligible to vote now. Fill out this form, bring it to the breakfast table. Congratulations." So that is the searing memory that stays with me from my great-grandmother, Ollie Mae Charleston, who anytime I have a chance to bring into the space, I like to call her into the space.
I can go. Actually, this is a selection that I'm voting in. And that's something that's like kind of hard for me to talk about as well, because I didn't vote in 2016, which is the first one I could have voted in. And then like looking at where I am now and what I'm doing and how important I know these things are, it's like crazy to me to look back and like want to slap myself and be like, what were you doing? But it also helps me because a big part of what we're doing with students is the education and telling them like why this is important, like all the different things, like the down ballot races and just all the issues you're voting on. Because personally, I was living in Alaska at the time, and I just like the dialogue that was around was like, this is a red state and it's just going to be a red state. So it doesn't matter like what you like, who you vote for, because that's just how it is. So I was like, okay, doesn't really matter. So then I just didn't vote on anything. And then looking back on that now, like I said, it's kind of crazy. But it really helps me to just see firsthand how important it is to talk about things with young people. Because before you go to college or go out in the real world, a lot of times it just isn't talked about besides your one required semester of like civics that you have to take. So definitely perspective shifting for me.
I got the chance to vote in the 2016 election. I was a senior in high school in a predominantly white school, and it got very oppressive very quickly. And that's when I began to really take my vote seriously. I was getting a lot of pressure between my friends. Half of them were divided. Half of them were voting Democrat, and then the other half were voting for Republican. And I actually began to lose friends. I did, because based off of their beliefs and their morals. And I began to realize that a lot of people focused more on the Democrat versus Republican and not really focusing on the policies that and the education that these people had. And it really frustrated me. And it frustrated me because I also received a lot of backhanded racism between people saying, go back to Mexico where you belong, speak American. And it was really frustrating because I was just taking Spanish class. I was just learning about my culture and my people, and my community. And to have those people suddenly say, you don't belong here because of the color of my skin. And it was frustrating. And I voted. And that night, when the votes were counted, I woke up the next morning to receive the news that I did not want to hear. And I kind of cried. I kind of cried because I knew that my future and my life, my body, my voice was at stake. And so were my friends and family and loved ones.
Is there a question that you all have for each other in listening that and what I think is important to note is that this session is being recorded. So we had 570 registrants. This session is being recorded, and so we'll use this in classrooms. We'll use this, there's going to be, SUSE is going to have a video library. So even if you're, talking to yourselves and asking questions right now to a relatively small percentage of the overall conference registrants, this video will be played. So think about that when you're asking questions. If you didn't ask a question, it will. And then I'll ask, I've got a question from, they have a question. Okay. How do you think that we can integrate intersectionality, right? They're in my feminist theories class, just so you know, although they came in knowing intersectionality, in voting initiatives. Question for everyone on the video feed. So the question is about intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw, multiple identities in relation to power. How can we incorporate, and I think you all touched on each of your individual identities and constituencies, but how do we address the intersecting issues of power and access?
For us at Black Voters Matter, we recognize and we champion and we support the fact that Black women continue to be leaders when it comes to electoral work. We know that it's always Black women who are out doing the hard work. We understand that, we celebrate that, but at the same time, we will also celebrate initiatives led by Black men. We stand in solidarity with our folks at the Black Male Voter Project. And we are constantly partnering with them. And I think it's important for us to understand and recognize that at different levels and different intersections, peer-to-peer correspondence, peer-to-peer training, peer-to-peer conversations are often the best ways to get a desired outcome. It's the best way to move people. So for example, I'm in this space with young people, and I always remind myself that anytime I have an initiative that is working with college students, I am flanked by college students, because otherwise I come on campus and I remind you of your mother, and you're very polite and you will smile and you will nod and you will say yes, but I will sound like your mother. Whereas your own peers will talk in a way that resonates with you, that you can relate to, that makes sense to you, and will bring up issues that are relevant to you at this point in time in your life. So definitely, peer-to-peer, whether it's gender or non-gender conforming, or a part of the country or a part of the state, whatever it is that brings together that context, that intersection, that commonality, is really an effective way to organize and move people.
I would go off of that. Our whole initiative is based on this peer-to-peer method. And then, with young people today, we work, like my team of interns is very diverse. And then so that's 25 students that I'm working with. But then a lot of our initiatives that we do is we'll do action blocks where everyone has to reach out to 10 of their friends and they have to tell them this. And then we get them to come to one of our actions. And then you're just expanding this really big circle and this big network of people, which is just awesome because it just keeps growing. And then when new people come in and they see it, they see this big group of people, and there's people that everyone can relate to because there's so many different people there. So yeah, I just definitely agree with that. That's a big tactic that we use, is like going into now virtual Zoom classes. And even when I go in, I'm like weird. I'm like practically a college student. I still think of myself as one sometimes, but even when I go in and am speaking as an organizer, it's a way different effect than when a student goes in and is talking like, hey, I'm in one of your classes. I'm in this class. Let me tell you something. So using that peer-to-peer method is definitely 100%, I think, a great way to start.
Yeah, peer-to-peer is one of the number one things that members of the USAB really focus on. We that Trevor and I have proposed to the council and the provost to see if we can connect with others, and we have. So we've connected with the student government organization, and we've connected with the Multicultural Center, where we will be holding weekly, bi-monthly, we're still trying to figure that part out, where we educate students on people's cultures, where they come from, based off of where their language comes from as well. And then we're also doing like a cooking class based off of the culture, and we're all holding it online, so it keeps everybody nice and safe, but it's still interpersonal, and we can interact with our peers. And another really important thing to remember is that one of the largest communities on campus is the LGBTQ plus community, and it's super important that their voices are heard. My junior year, I was very active in the Multicultural Center, where I got to hear multiple perspectives. And to be honest, I was very upset that the LGBTQ plus community is not heard. There's no trans bathroom that's available in every single building. And if there is one, you have to go all the way to the other side of the campus, which is like a 10-minute walk for some students. And not only that, but their rights are not protected. They're not seen as a person per se when it comes to them being attacked, or when it comes to their safety on campus. And that's something that I really want to focus on with the intersectionality subcommittee at the USAB, where we can hone in on the fact that they need to be seen as equal and are offered the same opportunities of people who are cisgendered. And that's something that Trevor and I have worked on, and we're hoping to work on and push forward before we both graduate. So it's super important and vital to the campus.
Well, that's a great segue into our final question. And thank you all so much. This time has gone by so very quickly, but in respect of your time, we've tried to keep, these sessions tight to 1 hour. So as the final question, from Dr. Keltner, from Stacy Keltner from Kennesaw State University, who's also the president of SUSA, Southeast Women's Studies Association, our co-partner. She asked this very important question that you were alluding to. Like, we started talking about voting rights, and now we're talking about the fact that we need trans bathrooms and safe spaces. Like, the whole campus needs to be a safe space for transgender students at Georgia State. And so that kind of alludes to, like, voting is not just about voting, right? It's about the larger issues of human rights and civic rights, social justice. And so Stacy Keltner asks, how do you connect voting to continued engagement? And she says she means, how do you work with students to see voting as part of a larger movement project for social justice? And these will be your final comments from the panel. So the bigger, like, okay, it's about voting, but how do you link voting to all of the larger issues of social justice? and beyond the election.
Guess we'll just be consistent and keep the same order. You know, voting is definitely related to any and everything that's related to social justice, right? So we know over the spring and the summer, we saw a call to defund police. Obviously, that's related to election. We know that in our larger cities, our city council, city commission are the ones who set budgets. Mayors will approve them, and those are the budgets that decide how much of our city's budget will go to police and mental health services, youth activities, et cetera. And all of those things are connected, so we can make a direct connection to those kinds of things. But we also have to look at other parts of the justice system. So district attorneys, sheriffs, judges, they are also on the ballot. So they are also related to that call for an overhaul of criminal justice. And so I think for me, organizations like Black Voters Matter, those who work in electoral spaces, we have to take responsibility to help our folks connect the dots to those issues that trouble them, that keep them up at night, that worry them, that are important to them. Just about every single one of them can be connected to an elected official, an elected seat, whether it's clean drinking water, whether it's climate change, whether it's your utility bills, whether or not that pothole at the end of the street gets fixed, or if you get a stop sign at this intersection that has now become really busy, and your children, when they're not doing home Zoom school, have to walk to school and cross a busy road. All of those things are related to elections. And then I would also just add that, you know, voting is really just the first step of civic engagement. Then once we get officials in office, there's an accountability piece that we as citizens have to take up. And it's a lot. You know, folks work, they have families, they have children, you know, people to look after. But this is all, you know, part of our civic duty. And if we want to see this good society, this great world that we all want to live in, we all have to recognize that we all have a part in it. And let me just also add one more thing before I go. Remember the civil rights movement. Remember the issues with bathrooms. It wasn't about bathrooms then, and it's not about bathrooms today. Let us all be clear on that.
I think for the most part, students, from my experience, are eager to participate in things, and they're eager to be involved in change movements if they're given the chance. I think they just need the encouragement, and also the education is a really big piece. I think after the election does wrap up, it's so important to continue to encourage students to remain engaged. So yeah, participation in civics and in politics is just not something that should be seasonal, and we should be pushing young people and just people in general to remain active and alert to all the things that are happening around them. Because no matter who you are, these policies and these practices that are being made and acted on by legislators and government officials and whoever, they affect every single one of us daily. And it's our responsibility as citizens to remain vigilant and remain involved. So speaking as an organizer, and for our organization on our end, we're going to hold statewide virtual training sessions on just general community organizing following the close of the election cycle in order to attempt to keep young people engaged in the process. We know that organizing yourself and organizing others is just essential to making change and achieving these movements of magnitude. So no matter what the issue is, it's just essential for young people to learn how to organize themselves, and then to be able to carry that on into all the future issues and endeavors that will come up over the course of their life. So I think that is another good place to start.
Excellent. And if you would, if you'd like to drop a link into the chat for PIRG or Black Voters Matter or the Student Government Advisory Board, right? Just put that in the chat. Final comment to Sequoia Gonzalez.
One of the things that I love to take advantage of is interpersonality with people, one-on-one, that I really like to take advantage of. Seeing from other people's perspectives is super important to me. And there are multiple times where I think I'm educated on something and I'm not. And that's something that I want to share with everybody. And one of the important things to also note is that some of these students aren't well educated on who's on the local ballot. A lot of people are focused on the presidential ballot. And one of the things that I'm pushing for is nonpartisan information to be delivered on social media and within the group chats that I'm in for my classes, to offer that information to students so that they have access and know where to find that information about these representatives and their policies. Because their policies start right from the very beginning with social justice. They are the ones that are going to represent us and our voices, especially here locally. And when our votes influence that change can then be made. And the same thing here at the school. Now that we have stronger representation with stronger, louder voices, I've heard from the provost and I've heard from the dean that this is the most active, loudest, and motivated group of undergraduate student advisory board members that they've ever had. And there's really been a push for change. And for the first time, they're actually beginning to what the students need, what they want, and what they desire. And they desire an equality between the professors and themselves and their fellow peers. And we will continue to educate them with our monthly or weekly, we're still working that out, education about the different multicultural perspectives of our students, because this is the most diverse university in Georgia, and it's important that everybody's heard.
Absolutely. And so I'll close with just referencing again how important it is to embody this feminist womanist idea of praxis, that you have these ideas, you have theoretical frameworks. A theory is an explanation, it explains something, and then you apply that. And I would just say the work that we do sometimes may seem very abstract, like what does reading feminist theory have to do? Well, if intersectionality was not so effective, if critical race theory was not so effective, there would not be the executive order that the impeached president of the United States has issued, right? The executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping, right? Which was just issued in September 22nd, that affects state contracts, right? We're a state institution. So by its very definition, African-American studies or any racial gender studies is something that is seen as a threat. And I grew up in Arizona and didn't read a book by a Black author until I was in college. And part of that reason is because Arizona was one of those states that just repressed education. And a while back, they passed HB 2281, House Bill 2281. And that was what's called the Anti-Ethnic Studies Bill, right? And it said, the legislature finds and declares that public school pupils should be taught to treat and value each other as individuals and not be taught to resent or hate other races or classes of people. And so it was defining ethnic studies and Latinx studies in particular, because this was Arizona, right? That if you were teaching Chicano Latino history, that by definition, you were teaching these students to hate white people, or that whites would feel badly about themselves, right? And so there's this way that this state idea of what it means to be educated is now at a federal level to make these discussions, and this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to teach critical thinking. It says that, college to career, making your ideas come to life, and doing something that's valuable. And so this is, I think, at the very heart of what we're here to do. And I really, really appreciate your time, appreciate all that you've given. And we will definitely keep in touch. And this is just the beginning. So I'm glad you all have each other's contact information and can loop each other in and start to close those circles. All right. And make sure that we, that we link arms and go beyond, definitely to the election, but through the election. So thank you very much. Have a beautiful evening. And we will end the broadcast now, but this is just the beginning. Thank you.